Hello, I am going to show a very simple example on how to set up live coding with QML. Here I have a very simple application running, and as you can see, if I make a modification and save it, the changes are instantly reflected in the application without the need to recompile the C++ code. This can be very useful and for both simple and complex applications. So here I'm going to show a very simple diagram of what the idea behind it is. We'll have a directory that will contain our QML files and that we monitor for changes. We will have a class that we define called file watcher. This file watcher class is the one that will monitor the changes in that directory, and whenever some changes detected, it will execute a callback function that we specify. And what this callback function will do is very simply reset the main QML source file so that we can see the changes that we made without having to recompile. The file watcher class will make use of a Qt class called QFileSystemWatcher that will do all the work for us. So this is a very simple wrapper almost around this class, and this class will have a couple of signals called directory changed and file changed that will let us know whenever a modification occurs. So if we go to the source code, if we see the main function, we have a QQuickView, which will be the main window of our application. We have a directory that we specify, which is the directory that will contain our QML files. And we also specify the name of the main QML file that we are going to eventually reload whenever a change is detected. We are going to instantiate a file watcher object. This class takes a function in its constructor. In this case, it's implemented as a lambda function, which is the callback that is going to be executed whenever a change is detected. This callback, you can see that is simply resetting the source in the QQuickView, so that will basically refresh the view with the latest changes. And at the bottom here, we can see that we have to tell the watcher which one is the directory that we want to be monitoring, and we're going to do so with this setDirectory function. If we go to the header of the file watcher class, we can see that it has internally a QFileSystemWatcher and the callback function that will be passed as a parameter in the constructor. We have this setDirectory function, and we also define a couple of slots, directory changed and file changed, which will be directly connected to the same a couple of signals that have exactly the same name in QFileSystemWatcher. We're also going to use a QDIR to store the directory path that we specify here with setDirectory. And finally, we also have a QTimer that we simply use to avoid reloading the QML source whenever we have multiple changes in a very short period of time. We don't want to be executing the callback multiple times in a fraction of a second. In that case, it doesn't make sense. So we're instead of executing the callback directly, we're going to do so with a timer. So if we have multiple changes in less than, let's say in this case, 100 milliseconds, we will only be calling the callback once. So in the constructor, we can see that we set the interval of the timer to 100 milliseconds. We're also connecting the directory changed and file changed signals from QFileSystemWatcher to our defined slots. We're going to set some filters in the QDIR so that we are going to only be monitoring files, not directories. For instance, we also want to avoid symlinks, and in this case, I've set it up so that we will be watching for changes only in files with QML extension. You could also very easily allow other types of extensions. For instance, if you wanted to track changes in image files, for example, you could very simply add it like this. And finally, we're going to connect the queue timeout timeout signal to our callback function. The set directory function will set the path to the queuedir and add call this add paths private function that will add all the paths for all the files, the QML files in that directory, to the watcher so that it can start tracking them. That add paths function will also be called whenever we receive the directory changed signal in our slot, because that will indicate that we have a change. For instance, if we create a new file in the directory, a new QML file, or if we remove a file, we want to update the watcher so that it can track the appropriate files. And finally, if we receive a file changed signal in our slot, we want to execute the callback indirectly through the timer. And that is all that's needed to set this up. As you can see, the code is quite simple, quite straightforward. I tried to make it as simple as possible. Of course, it could do with some improvements. In this case, it has a particular limitation that will only, in this case, be watching the files that are directly under the specified directory, but not under subdirectories. Although the code could be easily modified to contemplate that as well. The code will be available on GitHub. I'll leave a link in the description. Another improvement that could be made is that you could, for example, connect to the status changed signal of the QQuick view. That signal will indicate, for instance, if we have an error, let's say a syntax error in our QML file while we're using the live coding functionality, the status changed signal would be emitted, and the QQuick view would change to an error status, and at that point we could retrieve those errors and either print them out to standard output, for instance, or you could do something even more fancy, such as set the QML source of the view to an alternative QML file that lets you display the errors, for instance. I'm going to show a very small snippet where I've added some codes to animate the font point size here when I click it. And live coding can be, for instance, very useful to modify animation intervals on the fly. It can speed up development quite a lot, and you could even add new files, new QML files under the directory that is being watched, and the watcher would pick that up and update the QML file accordingly without any problem. So hope you find this useful. You can leave a comment if you have any questions or suggestions in the comment section, and thank you very much.